Hey everyone, and welcome to, I guess, what we're going to call the first episode of the BoardRoom Blueprint podcast. So yes, we have a name now.
Yes, we do.
Hey.
Pretty exciting stuff for us now.
That's right. So you can soon find us where you find your favorite podcast. But for now, these first few episodes are going to be on YouTube and Facebook, where you've been finding them all along. So, hey Daryl, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this podcast. Our very first one, as I look forward to
as
all
an
the
official,
webinars.
as an official podcast.
Official podcast.
That's
yes.
right. So today, I know, or the next couple of weeks, we're going to be covering some basics for the boardroom,
Yes.
dealing with the makeup and the number of people in the boardroom.
Exactly. Very important. And I get a lot of feedback on, what's the optimum size of a board. I get feedback about how should the board be structured. So I thought it was good that we had that discussion and make people understand that it's not a one size fits all, first of all, and you need to determine a lot of things before you decide what is optimum for your board size and for your board structure.
So today we're going to dig into the proper proper size of your boardroom. Most people probably think that's stupid simple. It's how many people can I get on the board, or I have 3 people, I have 10 people, but there actually is a little bit of a science and an art form around it, right?
There is. It's not a one size fits all, as I sort of said earlier, but one of the things you need to understand is that whatever the board needs to do, its work will determine how many board members you need. If you have board members or work that requires a lot of board members, then you would have that many board members accordingly. But there are some guidelines, obviously. You don't want to have too little. Because if you have too little number of board members, then what happens is that you, with this really small board, and I would say too little means 5 or less, you would have too much work for each individual board member. And it becomes taxing, too overwhelming for them. And it could really impact good governance if you have that. On the other side, you could have too many board members. And I've been accustomed to this, where you had more board members than 12. Okay. And people say, well, I normally have 12 board members. Well, when you have 12 board members, it can be a little taxing as well in terms of the work that the executive director has to do to make sure all these people get information all the time and are updated all the time and knowing what their board meeting packages are and those kinds of things. So it can be taxing. And remember, your executive director, for the board, spends an awful lot of time with the board, but they also have their own job to do as well, the operational side. So you want to make things as easy for them as well. So the optimum number, then there is an optimum number. There was a study done, actually, and a study that was done not too long ago in Canada said that the optimum board size should be around 7.
7.
No more.
Not just because it's a lucky number?
No. And no more than 9. And there's a reason for the odd number. And here's the reason, actually. If there's a vote that's being done,
you need someone to be able to break a tie.
Absolutely. Okay. And it's because usually it's the board chair that votes last.
Right.
And if there's a tie, the board chair will break that tie. So if you have 7 or you have 9, you can make that happen. But then again, before you decide if I'm at 12 board members or I'm at 14 board members and I want to go down to 9 or 7, before you do that, you should do a bit of a matrix. And the matrix will allow you to find out what are the things that you want to make sure that the board needs to do. So you would put that at the top part of the matrix. Here are all the activities of the board that we need board members to be doing. And then you have the list of your board members down below and who's doing what. And if you start to reduce that, and who's going to pick up the slack. And you want to make sure that you don't tax any one board member too much, because they are volunteers, many of them, unless you are a for-profit board. And a for-profit board, they are busy people as well.
Right.
And to be able to lead things. So those are the major points that you need to understand is, how low do I go? Don't go below 7. How high do I go? I do not recommend 12. And I don't recommend an even number.
I was going to say, that's an even number.
Yeah. And I've seen lots of 12s board sizes. And I've also seen, and I've seen in those 12 board sizes, I've been at board meetings where there's been a tie. So they've had to have discussions and try to revote.
Right.
Because if you have a tie and you can't break the vote, then that motion cannot be processed.
You end up with 12. It's more like a jury than it is a
Listen, there are some boards that are even bigger than that,
right.
and that just becomes too much because when you're at a board meeting, you want to have very good, concise discussions
Mm.
on the agenda, and the more board members you have, the more difficult it is to keep that concise. You want every board member to be participatory. They want them to participate and provide their input. You get 14 or 15 board members, it'd be a long board meeting.
Mm. For those of you who are watching live, I want to mention that our chats are open. If you have questions, we will be more than happy to answer them there. We might even make another podcast based off of some of those suggestions. But I know if it was me, I'd be sitting there and I was thinking, if I had a board, that had an even number of people on it, do I just start chopping people off, adding people? What am I supposed to do?
Well, I think the very first thing is a very good question, Jeremy, and you don't need a knee-jerk reaction. You know that you should have a more appropriate size board, whether it's a less board and an even number or an odd number. Sorry. What you need to do is you can make that happen through the term process, because each board member has a term while they're on the board, and they're usually staggered. That way you have that continuity when they're staggered at 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years. So when the next staggered terms are up, then you can adjust the board accordingly. Before you even do that, you need to get agreement from the board that this is what we want to do. And I'll go back to my old standby governing policy. If you have a governing policy, which you should have on the board size structure, it would show in that, or be documented in that board governing policy, that the board size will be X, and it would be an odd number. And that way, you have something that you're aligned to, and something you can refer to. And that way, the board, if they're not there, I think that would be the first thing I would do, is get that policy in place and determine what level you want to be at. Do I want to be at 7? Do I want to be at 9? Do I want, and what is, and that is going to be an odd number.
Is there
obviously.
purpose for going beyond that?
And then once that policy is approved, then you put the plan in place.
Right.
So if I'm more than that and I'm not an even number, plan it through the terms, and when the terms come up for the next round, and terms come up every year. That's why you stagger 1, 2, and 3.
So part of the number of of coming up with that number has to do with, if I understand correctly, the amount of projects, the amount of work that this board wants to accomplish.
Exactly.
Now, I guess the question is going to be, what if I don't know what that is?
Well, you would only know that through your strategic planning exercise,
right,
and through your governance practices.
Right.
And the governance practices will say there's certain things that are part of the governance practices anyway, that you provide oversight to the financials. So you're going to need to have an audit committee,
right,
or finance committee, and they're going to take at least 3 board members to be on that committee. And you provide reports, the audit committee does, to the board.
So it really comes down to understanding what is the mission of this board. And if I don't have that, it's hard for me to make up what that board is going to be.
To that point, Jeremy, you're absolutely right. If there should be a strategic plan.
Right.
And the strategic plan should be aligned, as I've reported previously, to the vision and mission and values of the organization. But if the strategic plan has a number of action plans that are required in any given year, and the board needs to be a part of it, of some of them, then you need to have the board size to be able to be a part of that.
Right.
Like, say, for example, I was on a board where it was a small board, and one of the strategic plans was, or action plans was, to acquire property, to build a new premises,
right,
or their first premises, because we were renting at the time. Well, there was a board committee around that whole process.
Right.
Because there's a lot of work that has to be done in acquiring the land and building the project, that whole project management piece. So that's came right from the strategic plan, and that wasn't part of the governance side of things, but it is a part of their vision. They wanted to be in their own premises and to be more exposure to the community.
Very cool. So if we now know we need the amount of work to give to each of these board members, then comes the question, if I'm trying to make up the board at a certain number, is how much can typically each person handle?
Well, most boards, we don't want them to handle too much.
Right.
And there's another sort of aspect of it, is that each one of these committees, if there's a number of committees, and let's say there's a building committee, a land acquisition building committee, and that's an ad hoc committee that's only in place until the building's done, right? So you will have a resource from management too, and it's usually going to be executive director. So you don't want to tax the executive director as well. You have the finance committee. The executive director is involved in providing financial information. So you need to understand that. But typically, as a general rule, you won't want a board member to be on any more than 2 committees, preferably only 1.
So that gives you a nice optimized number.
Absolutely, and because if you overwork them, they can become overwhelmed, and it's not, they have a life outside of the board as well, and they could get to a point where they won't reoffer and stay on the board, and now you have a vacancy. So you need to be able to manage that as well, and you need to make sure that the people that are being placed on these committees from the board, and this is part of board structure, we'll talk about it another time, have that expertise to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
So really, it's not just something you just come up with. It really does have a full structure and a reason to it.
It is. The size will determine the work. The work will determine the size. So they both work
Little
together.
chicken or the egg going on.
Absolutely. And there's governance work, and then there's strategic priorities.
Right.
From the strategic plan, and those are aligned to the vision and mission and values of the organization, and you need to make sure that you have enough people to be able to handle that.
So what if I'm a board and we have, let's say there's 5 of us on the board, we're relatively small, and we all of a sudden are wanting to take on more work, get into maybe more of the community for a not-for-profit or whatever it is we're trying to do. Do I bite the bullet and go to 6, which is an even number, or should I immediately go to 7?
Well, that's a 2-prong approach.
Okay.
If you're a 5-person board and you still want to stay at 5, which you can, it's challenging because of these things that are coming up. But what you can do is you can go out to the community, your members, and you can put together an ad hoc board from them as like a committee board. So they're a committee, and you take 1 person from your board that will work with them, and that way it's not taxing all the board as much. You basically have increased the board, but only temporary, by having this sort of arm's length committee working on a particular project until such time as you get to a point where you want a 7 board, move from the 5 to the 7. When you do that, start with a policy that's what you want. Build your policy, and it's going to be a 7-person board, and then you would agree at a board meeting that once the elections happen, it's going to increase. So you may have two board members that are reoffering of the 5, and you will have 2 additional board members standing for election that you would like, so that you can get the board up to that 7 piece right away.
So to sum it up, really,
at the annual general meeting, right?
Right. So to sum it up, basically, if I've got a board and I'm trying to figure out the perfect makeup, let the work decide.
Yes.
So that we can share it evenly.
Exactly.
Be efficient.
Yes.
Get it done. Try and avoid even numbers.
Yes.
Because if you don't, you're asking for a lot of complication.
Yes.
And have a strategic plan in place
yes.
to get that work figured out.
Absolutely.
Mission, vision, values, all that stuff figured out.
Yes.
And on that note, I'm going to tease a little bit. You'll see something coming from D2 soon. So we'll announce that in a coming podcast. But yeah, I think that sums up that does
a sum up. It does, and is making sure that you are comfortable with your size, and it can't be too small, it can't be too big, and it is largely driven to the points that you just made.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Daryl.
My pleasure.
I know we're coming back next week to deal with what is the makeup of that board, which I think has more to deal with who gets what job, making sure people are doing the right bit. So we'll be dealing with that.
And it also has a little bit of an overlap too. Sometimes what you want in your board makeup can increase your size as well.
So if you have any questions on that, put those in the chat as well. If you're watching this after the fact, put it as a comment, and we'll make sure to take a look. Thanks again, Daryl.
My pleasure. Thank you.